My cousins told my wife that I was cheating on her. They called it a joke. She's not. And I'm not either. The beginning of the evening that changed everything started out just like any other relaxed weekend gathering, the kind where nothing is planned but everything somehow falls into place. My wife Sarah and I had invited a handful of people over, my 3 cousins, Jake, Nate, and Courtney, along with a few close friends who happened to be in town and looking for something low-key. The invitation was spontaneous, thrown together over text messages and group chats, and by late afternoon, our living room was full of familiar voices and the smell of seasoned beef simmering in a skillet. We decided on tacos because they were easy, and everyone could build their own just the way they liked. The mood was light from the start. Music played softly in the background, people floated from the kitchen to the patio, and someone opened a bottle of wine we had forgotten we had. Sarah, who almost never drinks, poured herself half a glass to be polite and to share in the spirit of the night, even though I could see she was already trying to pace herself. She's always been thoughtful that way, careful, observant, the kind of host who notices when someone's drink is getting low or if someone looks uncomfortable and tries to fix it before they even have to ask. Everyone was in good spirits, and the energy in the room was the kind that made you believe nothing bad could possibly happen. We joked, we laughed, the food disappeared faster than we expected, and as the sky darkened outside the windows, the glow from the hanging lights made everything feel warmer, closer. If anyone had told me then that the night would end in silence, with questions I still don't know how to answer, I wouldn't have believed them. But that was before things turned. Before one moment unraveled everything we thought we understood. It happened without warning, in the middle of a conversation about something trivial, maybe a movie or a vacation someone was planning, when Sarah suddenly appeared beside me, her expression completely devoid of the easy calm she usually carried. Without saying a word, she grabbed my arm tightly, her fingers digging into my sleeve, and pulled me into the kitchen with a force that left no room for questions. The shift in her demeanor was immediate and jarring, and I barely had time to process it before we were out of earshot from the others and standing under the harsh kitchen light that made everything feel too exposed. Her eyes, normally so soft and deliberate, were blazing. Not teary, not trembling, just pure, controlled fury. Then she asked it in a low voice that didn't need volume to cut straight through me. She asked if I was cheating on her. No preamble, no build-up, just that one devastating question. I stood there stunned, mouth half open, the words lodged somewhere in my throat, because I genuinely didn't know what the hell was happening. It felt like a trapdoor had opened beneath the night, and suddenly we weren't in the middle of a party anymore, we were standing on the edge of something breaking. I searched her face for some clue, something that might explain where this had come from, but all I saw was betrayal, raw and undiluted, as if something had already convinced her it was true. And I had no idea what that something was. She didn't wait for a response. Before I could even form a single word, Sarah snatched my phone from the kitchen counter, her movements sharp and determined, and walked straight down the hallway, locking herself in our bedroom without looking back. I stood there frozen, the weight of the moment pressing into my chest like something too big to breathe through. I didn't follow her right away, partly because I was still trying to figure out what had just happened, and partly because the entire house had suddenly fallen into a strange, uncomfortable silence. When I turned around, I saw that everyone in the living room had stopped talking. The music was still playing, but softer now, as if the air itself had gone still. A few of my cousins, Jake and Nate especially, were leaning into each other, whispering just loud enough to be heard but not understood, and Courtney had this smirk on her face like she was holding back a laugh. That's when it hit me. The way they had been joking all evening, dropping little comments that I hadn't paid much attention to at the time, the way they had nudged each other when Sarah walked by, even that offhand remark Jake made about how well I must be juggling things. It had seemed like nothing then, just stupid, borderline inappropriate banter, but now it felt calculated. They had planted something. A suggestion. A story. Maybe as a joke, maybe as a game, maybe just because they thought it would be funny to see what would happen. But Sarah had believed it. Or at least, it had struck a nerve deep enough to make her doubt me. And now she was locked behind a door with my phone in her hands, looking for evidence that didn't exist, while the people who started it all sat there on my couch, trying not to laugh. Later that night, after everything had begun to unravel and the tension in the house had thickened to the point that no one could pretend it was still a party, the truth finally came out. My cousins, Jake, Nate, and Courtney, and a few of their friends had decided it would be funny to tell Sarah that I was cheating on her. They framed it as an April Fool's joke, something harmless, just a bit of drama to liven up the evening. They hadn't expected her to take it seriously, they said. They didn't think she'd react like that. It was all meant to be a joke. But for Sarah, it wasn't a joke. It was a wound. She had grown up in a deeply religious family, where loyalty and trust were sacred, where marriage was not just a commitment but a spiritual covenant. The idea of betrayal in a relationship, especially something as serious as infidelity, wasn't something to laugh about or throw around for entertainment. It was a moral devastation. When they told her I was cheating, even if it had been said with a smile or a wink, even if there had been laughter afterward, the seed of doubt they planted didn't land in some shallow place. It cut straight to the center of her beliefs, her upbringing, her fears. They thought they were being funny. But what they did was shake the foundation of the one relationship she had fought to keep sacred her entire life. It wasn't just cruel, it was reckless. And by the time they realized the damage they'd done, it was too late to take it back. Because no matter how many times you say, "It was just a joke," once trust is cracked, the echo of those words doesn't disappear. When I tried to talk to my relatives, hoping for some kind of acknowledgement, some flicker of guilt or even a half-hearted apology, they just shrugged their shoulders like it was nothing. One of them, Nate, even laughed and said, "It's just a joke," as if that was supposed to erase everything they had done, as if the pain they caused could be dismissed with a grin and a wave of the hand. There wasn't an ounce of remorse in their voices, no recognition of the fact that they had violated the most intimate space of my life, not just my home but my marriage, and they treated it like a casual prank. But for Sarah, it wasn't a joke. It was betrayal, cold, sharp, and humiliating. She didn't wait for explanations or apologies. She stood in the center of the living room, her voice calm but shaking, and told them all to leave. There was no yelling, no drama, just the kind of firmness that comes from knowing a line has been crossed and cannot be uncrossed. She looked each of them in the eyes as they gathered their things, and not one of them had the decency to apologize. They shuffled out, still laughing under their breath, still treating it like she was the one overreacting. And I stood there frozen, completely at a loss. I didn't defend her the way I should have, not in that moment. I was caught between disbelief and embarrassment, trying to process how my own family could do something so thoughtless. And while I stood there trying to find the right words, Sarah was standing alone, demanding respect that I hadn't found the strength to demand for her. That moment stays with me because I knew then that silence, even when it's stunned, can feel like betrayal too. That night, for the first time in our marriage, we slept in separate rooms. There was no dramatic fight, no raised voices or slammed doors, just a quiet parting of ways as Sarah walked into the guest room and shut the door behind her. I stood in the hallway for a few minutes, unsure whether to follow her or give her space, but something in the way she had looked at me told me I had already made the wrong choice earlier, when I didn't speak up, when I didn't shield her from the people who were supposed to be mine. The silence in the house was suffocating, the kind that doesn't just fill the space but presses down on you like a weight. The next morning she moved around the kitchen like a stranger, quiet, withdrawn, avoiding eye contact. I apologized, genuinely and with everything I could put into words, but my words felt thin against the weight of her disappointment. She barely responded. Her usual warmth, the gentle way she would ask how I slept or remind me to eat breakfast, was gone. In its place were anxious glances and long silences that said far more than anything she could have spoken aloud. She wasn't angry, not in the way I had feared. She was hurt. And worse, she felt alone in a home that should have made her feel safe. Meanwhile, my cousins started messaging me as if none of it mattered. They sent texts saying Sarah and I were overreacting, that we were humorless, and needed to lighten up. Jake even sent a meme, trying to make a joke out of the entire night, as though mocking it would somehow smooth over what had happened. I stared at my phone in disbelief, feeling the space between my family and my wife grow wider with every word. And for the first time, I started to wonder if that gap could ever be closed. Because the cracks weren't just in our marriage now, they were in the very foundation of who I thought I could trust. Sarah began checking my phone regularly and she didn't try to hide it. There was no yelling, no dramatic confrontation, just this quiet, cold precision in the way she asked for it or picked it up when I set it down. She would scroll through my messages, read my recent calls, check my browser history, not with curiosity or suspicion, but with a numb kind of resolve, like someone confirming what they already feared. She didn't accuse me of anything and she didn't say much while doing it, but the weight of what she wasn't saying hung between us every time her eyes flicked across the screen. I knew exactly where it came from. That so-called joke, what my cousins had thought would be funny, had done something irreversible. It had planted doubt where there had never been any before. It had turned moments of routine privacy into opportunities for reassurance, and even though I had nothing to hide, even though I had always been open with her, the fact that she now felt the need to check it all shattered something between us. I understood why she was doing it. I didn't blame her. But it hurt in a way I didn't know how to explain because every time she looked through my phone, it was a silent reminder that a crack had formed in our trust, and I had no idea how to seal it. The worst part wasn't the action itself. It was the distance it symbolized. It was in the way she avoided my gaze while scrolling, in the way she quietly handed the phone back without saying anything at all. It made me feel like I was being tested in a relationship that had once felt invincible. And it broke my heart a little more each time. My cousins eventually sent Sarah an apology letter, no doubt after realizing how deeply things had spiraled, but instead of bringing any sort of relief or reconciliation, it only made everything worse. I remember when she opened it, sitting at the kitchen table in the same chair where she had once laughed with them over wine and tacos, her face unreadable as her eyes moved over the page. I watched her from across the room, hoping for even the smallest sign of release, of softening. But none came. The letter didn't say, "We're sorry we did a terrible thing." It didn't acknowledge the damage they had done to her peace, to our relationship, to the trust she had once given them without hesitation. Instead, it was full of phrases like, "You misunderstood," and "It wasn't meant to be taken seriously," and "We never thought you'd react like that." They shifted the blame onto her shoulders, painting her as too sensitive, too rigid, too unwilling to laugh at what they insisted was harmless fun. It wasn't accountability, it was a performance dressed up as remorse. Sarah read the letter twice, then folded it neatly and placed it back in the envelope like she was closing a door. She didn't cry. She didn't even speak. She just slid it across the table to me and said, in the calmest voice I've ever heard from her, "This is why I don't trust them. And now I'm not sure I can trust you either." And in that moment, I realized that a poorly worded apology can do more damage than silence. Because it doesn't just fail to heal the wound, it twists the knife. I found myself caught between two fires, and no matter which direction I turned, I was burning. On one side, my relatives, those same cousins who had once felt like siblings, were calling me a backstabber, sending me message after message about how I had overreacted, how I had let a woman control me, how family was supposed to come first no matter what. The texts became more aggressive with each passing day, laced with bitterness and betrayal, as if I had somehow abandoned them by refusing to excuse the damage they caused. They didn't want to understand what they had done. They only wanted me to stay loyal to the version of family they believed in, one where cruelty could be hidden behind laughter and consequences didn't exist. On the other side was Sarah, quiet most of the time now, but when she did speak, it was with a pain so raw I didn't know how to hold it. She said I hadn't supported her enough. She said she had expected me to stand beside her when she felt the most humiliated, the most violated, and instead, she felt like she stood there alone. And she was right. I had hesitated. I had frozen. I hadn't pushed back hard enough when the people who were supposed to love me turned their backs on the woman I had chosen to spend my life with. And then her parents got involved. When they heard what had happened, they didn't yell or demand answers. Her mother went silent, lips pressed into a tight line. Her father, after a long pause, simply shook his head and said, "We warned you." He didn't say it with spite, he said it with disappointment, the kind that lands harder than anger. They had never been against me, but they had always carried a quiet concern about the people I called family. And now, I had given them every reason to believe they had been right all along. I was standing in the center of the wreckage with smoke rising on both sides, and for the first time in my life I couldn't tell which way was forward. Sarah and I sat down at the kitchen table late one evening, the same place where so much had unraveled, and for the first time in what felt like weeks, we really talked. Not in fragments or careful exchanges, but honestly with everything laid bare. I told her I was done trying to balance both sides, that I would no longer maintain contact with my cousins, that no joke, no blood tie, no childhood memory was worth sacrificing her trust, her dignity, or the peace of our home. I promised her that line would not be crossed again, not by them and not by me. She didn't say anything at first, just looked down at her hands, fingers twisting in her lap. Then slowly the tears came, not loud or dramatic but quiet and steady, the kind that carry more than sadness, the kind that hold relief, exhaustion, and years of buried hope. Through the tears she said, "I chose you against all odds. And now your family is making fun of my faith." Her voice cracked on the word faith, and it felt like the final truth had finally surfaced, the core of what had hurt her the most. Not just the betrayal but the mockery of something sacred to her, something she had built her life around and entrusted to me when she said yes to our life together. We hugged then for the first time in what felt like forever. It wasn't just physical, it was the kind of embrace that says asterisk I see you. I hear you. I choose you again. Asterisk, and in that moment, I understood the cost of the decision I had made. I was letting go of people who had once felt like home, but I was doing it to protect the one person who had never treated me like anything less than family. It was a choice, and it was the right one. I blocked Jake, Nate, Courtney, and the rest of them one by one, not in anger, but with a steady hand and a clear head, knowing that the only way forward was to shut the door completely. There were no more warnings, no drawn-out explanations. I had said everything that needed to be said, and they had made it clear they didn't want to understand. A few days later, one of them showed up at our house. Jake, I think, standing out front like he had every right to be there, like everything could be fixed with a shrug and a forced apology. I saw him through the window, knocking, waiting, pacing. But I didn't open the door. I stood on the other side, unmoving, and I let the silence speak for me. Later that day, their mother, my aunt, called me, her voice already brimming with outrage before I even had the chance to say hello. She couldn't believe what I was doing. Break family ties over a joke? She snapped. You're crazy. She spoke in that indignant tone that older relatives sometimes use, the one that insists blood should excuse everything, even cruelty. But to me it was no longer a joke. It hadn't been for a long time. It was betrayal disguised as humor. It was humiliation paraded as entertainment. And it was a total disregard for the emotional safety of the woman I had vowed to protect. I told my aunt as calmly as I could that family isn't just about shared DNA. It's about trust, about respect, about knowing when someone's pain matters more than your own pride. And if they couldn't see that, then maybe they were never truly family to begin with. I hung up without waiting for a response. For the first time in weeks, I felt something close to peace. Because choosing Sarah wasn't just the right thing, it was the only thing. Sarah and I have slowly begun to rebuild what was broken, not with grand gestures or sudden forgiveness, but through quiet, consistent moments that feel almost like starting over. She no longer checks my phone, and while the memory of those days still lingers between us like a faint echo, there's a new softness in the way she looks at me now, a cautious openness that tells me she hasn't given up. We've started having dinner together again at the table, just the two of us, without the heavy silences or tense glances that used to fill the space. We talk more about little things mostly, her day, a recipe she wants to try, a news story that caught her eye, and I've learned to listen better, not just to her words but to what lives beneath them. Sometimes we sit on the couch and watch movies again, wrapped in a blanket, her head resting lightly on my shoulder. It's not quite like it was before, not yet. There's still a quiet vulnerability in her, and I know there are places she's still protecting, parts of herself that aren't ready to fully trust just yet. But she's trying. And every time she laughs, every time she reaches for my hand without hesitation, every time she lets herself relax in my presence, I feel that small flicker of hope growing stronger. It's a slow recovery and I don't expect miracles. But I see it now, the way she's giving me a chance not just to stay in her life, but to earn my way back into the space where love doesn't have to flinch. And for that, I'm willing to do whatever it takes. Maybe one day Sarah will forgive my cousins, maybe time will soften the sting of what they did, and she'll be able to look at the past without feeling that sharp ache of betrayal. Or maybe she won't. Maybe the scar they left will always be there, not raw, but permanent, a reminder of how quickly trust can be shattered by carelessness disguised as humor. I don't know what healing will look like for her, and I've stopped trying to control that outcome. What I do know, what I am absolutely certain of, is that if I ever have to choose again between a circle of relatives who thought a woman's pain could be the punchline to their joke and the woman who sacrificed everything to be with me, I will choose her every single time. Because Sarah didn't just marry me, she stood beside me when it would have been easier to walk away, she endured humiliation and doubt with grace, and even after all of it, she still looked at me with enough love to try. She deserves a partner who chooses her without hesitation, without loopholes, without silence in the moments that matter most. And if protecting her means keeping distance from the people who share my blood but not my values, then so be it. I've learned that family isn't just about who you're born to. It's about who you stand up for. And I'm standing with her. Always.